Jesse Arguin. Councilmember Sophie Hahn. There's no representative from Berkeley.
So, Stephanie, it might be easier if you just called the jurisdiction. I think that would probably be the easiest way to get to that.
Here.
Emeryville. Here. Fremont. Here. Hayward.
Here.
Livermore.
Here.
Oakland. Oakland is not present. Piedmont. San Leandro. Not present, but they are sending an alternate. Union City. There's no representative from Union City.
I'm assuming we have a quorum?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. We have a quorum. This is next first meeting. Who was at the last meeting? Sorry? This is next first meeting. I wasn't at the last first meeting. Okay. Just to, I'm sorry, I had to reset because I wasn't at the last meeting. And I just wanted to make sure that we properly welcomed our new executive director, Mr. Nick Chassett. And I attended a meeting the other day of the local CCs, and I just sat around saying, wait till our guy gets here. They kept talking about things that are going on. And boy, we wish we knew somebody at the PUC and all that. And I just smiled. So, Nick, is there anything you'd like to say before we get started?
Well, today was my first day in the office, and it's a lot of work related to getting our implementation plan. So we're off and running. Hopefully, we'll get it approved and get it submitted. And I'm just really looking forward to working with everybody here. I did want to just mention to our board members that I've asked Stephanie to reach out to each of you to try to find some time for me to meet with everyone individually, just to kind of get to know you. So that's going to be coming. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have anything for Nick? All right, public comment. That is the time in which you can speak to anything that's not on today's agenda. I don't believe I have any speakers cards. Maybe I do. No?
Barbara did not say which one she's speaking to.
Who?
Barbara Stebbins, I'm not sure.
Barbara, what do you want to speak to? Are you on public comment?
Oh, thank you.
No? Does this mean you don't want to speak, or it's just not public comment? All right, well, we'll just note that you passed. Okay, so there is no public comment. We will now move to the approval of minutes from the July 19th meeting.
Can I move approval of the minutes?
I'll second.
I'm sorry, where'd the second come from?
Over here.
Okay, Biddle and Bacon. Biddle Bacon?
Sounds like a great sandwich.
Yeah, there you go. Anybody got any comments on that? All right, any objection to the motion? Motion passes with those in attendance. We'll move to county staff updates. Turn it over to
me this evening. I'm standing in for Bruce Jensen. Bruce is out on vacation for another couple of weeks. And as you all know, my name is Sean Marshall from Lean Energy. So I'm just going to run through the county staff update briefly to let you know that there are just a couple of things. The first of which is to let you know that the Community Advisory Committee has been off to a great start, has met already 3 times in literally a month. So big hats off to the CAC and the chair who runs a good meeting, and Olivia will have more to say this evening. But just to let you know that the group has been predominantly focused on the implementation plan to keep pace with hopefully its adoption this evening. And then the idea is that the CAC will hopefully drop back to 1 meeting per month. That schedule has not been set yet, but it is on a coming agenda for the group and also in discussion with Nick going forward. So glad to report that group is off and running. Next up is agency insurance. Just to let you know that workman's comp insurance will be covered through the payroll service that EBCE will be contracting with. Right now, that's looking like Paychex. And then we also have a couple of private insurers looking at policies for general liability, errors and omissions, and directors and officers if needed. D&O may not be needed. And so that's on our list to discuss with Nick, and we'll get some proposals in, and we'll see which one your CEO would like to select. So we plan to have that back as an information item for you in September to let you know that it's done. Next up is human resources. You all may remember that a couple of months ago your board approved a contract with Coffin Associates, who is helping with not only payroll service and the workman's comp, but also working with Nick on the staffing plan and job descriptions for a couple of initial positions that we'll be posting at some point soon, and you can comment on that, please, if you would. And that is, I believe, an administrative assistant position and a chief operating officer program director position that is currently under development as we speak. Nick started today in I'm sure, a very fancy office upstairs from the CDA staff. And meetings are starting, and all of the download and all of that is beginning to happen now. So any questions on that so far? All right.
Any questions?
All right. Last item is just an update on the data management call center RFP. You all may remember that there was a selection committee comprised of the CEO, Nick Gelati, who's the vice chair of the CAC, and another Nick, whose last name escapes me, I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Who participated in those interviews. I believe that the scoring process and evaluation is nearly complete, with the plan to have a recommendation back before your board at its September meeting. So that is underway as we speak, and I don't know if there's anything else to report there.
So we're going through the process of our reference checks, and that should be something that we complete in the coming days. Really, the open question, I think, to the board is we can either come back at our next meeting with a recommendation for a selection and then commence contract negotiation, or we can, based on the scoring, make a selection, begin contract negotiation, and then bring a contract for approval to the board. And I think that's a question I would like to get some feedback on, if possible, if there's a strong preference one way or the other.
Al?
So I'd like to see our new CEO do the negotiating and bring us back a recommendation for final adoption. That would be my preference.
I would agree with Mr. Mendel. Anybody else? You're going to let the two of us speak for all of you? Okay, there you go. Bacon's on board. Okay, there you have it.
Great, thank you.
Anything else, Sean?
Nope, that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate the speed in which this meeting is moving. Barbara, I'm running out of items, and you have 2 speaker cards here. Did you want to speak on this item? Barbara, I swear I have 2 speaker cards for you, and I'm running out of items, so I just wanted to check with you because you didn't number them.
There isn't right now the agenda. We're not sure of items.
Okay. Well, I'll just keep checking with you. All right.
Okay.
Trying to be inclusive here. Okay, item 5.
Good evening, Chair and members of the board. I'm Inder Khalsa, the General Counsel. Tonight I'm presenting a resolution to the board that would authorize our new Chief Executive Officer to sign contracts up to $100,000. So the Joint Powers Agreement does include some general language authorizing the CEO to sign contracts, but it's best to have an explicit signing authority dollar amount. I did a little bit of research and looked at some other operating CCAs and found that the specific signing authority seems to vary from entity to entity. The Sonoma Clean Power is an example of a CCA that where their CEO is authorized to sign up to $100,000. So we're bringing forward this tonight. The dollar amount is at the discretion of the board. There is a resolution that limits the expenditures to those that have been authorized already by the budget and requires the CEO to report back at the next meeting about any executed contracts. And let me know if you have any questions.
Anybody in the public wish to speak on this item? Any questions from the board? I would just like to say if we approve this, you'll have a $75,000 higher signature than the CAO of the County of Alameda. So I'm sure she'll be pleased with this. But I do believe she should have the same signature authority, so I would be in favor of this.
Okay.
Move approval.
Second.
It was moved by Stradowski, second by Calb. Is there any objection to the motion? The motion passes without objection. Okay, the grand event, item 6.
So, item 6 is...
Did you almost quit?
No, I wasn't.
Not a signing authority.
Yeah, exactly. So item 6 is the implementation plan. And can we advance the slides?
Are you going to start out?
Yeah, so I'll start out, Gary, and that we may ask you to proceed. Okay. So the slides actually sort of bounce around a little bit. They talk about the first slide. Let's advance the slide one more. Is just sort of the implementation plan, and the key objectives: comply with PUC requirements and maintain maximal flexibility for EBC and language wherever possible. And then the supplement, the rest of the slides go into some discussion of power supply. I'd actually like to just focus on the implementation plan, which is not really dealt with in detail in the slides themselves. But we did provide the implementation plan to the board. I do want to sort of touch on one point, and it's in the resolution that INDER did provide to the board. And let me get to that.
There should be a corrected resolution on the dais with the materials that Stephanie provided to you. And all that I changed in this resolution was to allow Nick, our CEO, to make any necessary non-substantive clarifying or clerical changes before filing it with the CPUC.
So one of the reasons why we talked about adding that is that the CAC did provide a set of 3 different comments, and in an effort to be responsive, there was some discussion that Anna, Olivia, and I had throughout today to kind of walk through, some wordsmithing of those recommendations. And while I do want to give Anna, Olivia, you an opportunity to sort of walk through what those recommendations are, my recommendation to the board is that we, at the end, as long as there's sort of some general agreement that we can work out the wordsmithing, that we actually can do some of that offline, so we can sort of discuss some of those changes. And if you want to be able to take them back to the CAC, you can, and then we'll work out sort of exactly how things are written without having to come back to the board for further approval, because sort of the spirit of what it's going to say is something we agree to here, and we can work out those details in the next couple days just as the CAC is available. So I just wanted to explain why we made that modification to the resolution. Okay, so why don't given that we don't have the slides with the implementation plan, I'm not going to sort of walk through the plan itself. Maybe I will ask the board members if there are any specific questions that or areas that you'd like to focus on. And after the board has a chance to do that, maybe I'll invite you, Anna Olivia, to sort of present the CAC's 3 recommendations. We can have a discussion of those, and then we can open it up for public comment, and then based on that, see where things go. Sound like a plan? Okay, great. So with that, board members, are there any specific aspects of the plan that you all would like to discuss? I can sort of discuss it at a high level, certainly.
Start over here. Start on this end.
Okay, sure. It was brought up at the last meeting, the idea of rates, starting rates competitive with PG&E, and there was some talk about the language of competitive and whether we wanted competitive or we wanted starting rate that was below PG&E's rate. So that's something I'd like to talk about when appropriate.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll ask Colin drafted the implementation plan, so just so that we don't have it on the slides. I'm sort of I don't really want to, without the public being able to see exactly what we're looking through, it might be a little bit of a challenge to sort of go line by line here. But maybe if you can, at a high level, just walk through the language. I think you have a little more facility with where exactly everything is than I do.
Hi, everyone. Colin Cameron with EES. So where possible, we tried to maintain maximal flexibility as directed at the previous board meeting. So kind of in keeping with that, the word competitive was used where possible. However, we did specify that rates would be lower initially. So, the objective there was to give maximal flexibility down the road rather than giving a hard commitment.
Can you point out where in the plan it talks about the lower rates?
Page 39 is where we talk about our rate policies. And there's a section of rate competitiveness. A primary goal is to offer competitive rates for electric services that EBC would provide to participating customers. For participants in EBC's standard tariff, the goal would be for EBC program rates to initially be lower than similar generation rates offered by PG&E, subject to actual energy product pricing and decision of EBC's board. Then goes on to say for voluntary participants, prices may be higher, but that's sort of kind of recognize that the voluntary opt-in rates may be higher.
Okay, great. Thank you. I missed that. Thanks for that clarification.
The East Bay Clean Power Alliance had what looked like reasonable minor changes that they're recommending, and I see no reason not to go with those. I take it that all of you saw the letter that they sent, and what do you think?
Stephanie, do we have a copy?
Yeah,
Stephanie, is there a copy of that letter available?
Yeah.
When was that received? Today? This afternoon?
About 3:40.
Yeah, okay. Makes it a little hard to digest.
Scott, would you also include the CAC recommendations in your in what you're advocating for as well?
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
The CAC, the Community Advisory Committee also had recommendations, some language changes, as well as the Clean Power Alliance.
Okay, I missed those.
Okay. They're similar in nature, at least some of them overlap, as the inclusion of the local development business plan and some of the language is similar in both of the recommendations.
Okay, let's have that a part of the discussion, I say.
I think the executive director was asking that he be given the authority to go ahead and work with them to work through those issues at the end of this discussion.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to chime in. Regarding the phasing, my staff at City San Leandro talked about the assumptions and making sure there's a validation process, more information provided for the phasing of the breakdown of what that looks like, as well as the assumptions for the revenue expectations. I see the charts, the exhibits, but there's not a lot of detail. So wondering what that looks like. Is it flat? Is it 2% increase, decrease? What's the impact on electricity for electric vehicles? Those kind of assumptions. And if necessary, I know that you'll be hiring a finance manager, so would it make sense to have an ad hoc committee to assist with the financial projections?
So I was able to connect with your sustainability manager today, and I suggested that after this, if indeed the delegation is granted, that I would reach out to your staff and we can work through the specific questions. Again, I think that they're more, sort of the kinds of details that are worth certainly working through, but I think they don't rise to sort of substantive sort of policy decisions that the board needs to make. So that was the approach that I was going to suggest to follow up on those questions and suggestions.
As long as we have understanding of the assumptions based on the 10-year forecast, I think that's important for this policy board to understand for the viability and the existence beyond the 10-year plan. Would be important. Thank you.
Did you need to respond right now, Anna Olivia? I'm kind of working that way. Al, did you have something? Okay. Anybody? Don?
On the financing and the cash flow between us and PG&E, so I understand that. When PG&E bills a customer, they send a bill out and get paid, and then the money doesn't get to us for about 2 months. Is that normally the process? The revenue coming in from PG&E about a 2-month period? Then from PG&E bills to us, how long does that take normally? Will that?
So my understanding, Gary, please why don't you step up and clarify, is that we buy the energy, so we actually have to make payments, and then the bills go out. It takes 30 days for the billing cycle, and then payment is remitted, and then it takes roughly 30 days for PG&E to sort of remit the funds to our bank account. So that's the 60-day.
Okay.
And if I'm missing something, Gary, please interject.
And then how quick do they bill us for the?
How quickly does?
Yeah, if the power we're buying from them.
That will be based on the terms that you negotiate with your suppliers. So it's going to be, again, it will sort of depend on the commercial terms.
Okay, good. Then we're planning to borrow about $2 million to start up, and then we plan to borrow about another $15 million about the first of the year to continue that startup operation.
Right.
Okay.
Right, and then there's the last tranche is to cover the phase in when you're starting lots of accounts
until we get going in May. Then.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Just a few quick items. Reading through the report and seeing that there are 3 phases: municipal, then non-residential, then finally the residential accounts. I think that's a great way to go. The more outreach we can provide residents before the switch over, the better. It also says municipal accounts and volunteers. How does one volunteer, and where can I sign up for phase 1 if that's the case?
I think that's something that we're going to be working out, particularly with some of our marketing folks. The big challenge with volunteering is to be able to phase in your announcements. So you're not going to be able to volunteer a week before. You're going to have to be, we'll have to have a volunteer phase in, if you will, so that volunteers identify, and then there's a chance they volunteer. We still have to send them their opt-out notices, even though they volunteered. So there's going to be some timing, but I expect that that's something that we're going to be thinking about quite a bit.
Because I would volunteer before phase 3 because I like to put my energy where my mouth is when I'm explaining it to residents, and I'd like the ability to say, hey, I switched. It's painless. My wife didn't yell at me. Everything's fine, and kind of explain it in phase 3. So, you can just give me my 3 notices all in one night, and I'll sign off on them, whatever you need. A couple other quick items on page 25 of the report, table 8. I see that there might have been an error in the table to see if we were reading through the whole report, but it looks like between. Or was it 25? No, sorry. I think it's table 5, page 23. Between the years 2022 and 2023, we actually drop in residential accounts. It looks like that whole shift between year 2022 and 2023, we're dropping in our number, or at least in the residential accounts. So I'm hoping that's an error, that we don't predict a loss of several hundred residential accounts for some reason.
We didn't see that. Thanks for bringing.
Can you come to the microphone, please?
Sure. Thanks for bringing that up. We didn't catch that. We'll get it fixed up for the final draft.
Yeah, perfect. See, we read all the tables.
We don't see we don't see you losing part of your residential class. That was inadvertent.
Great. And also my last comment, I can support the resolution, including the CEO authorizing to make wordsmithing and other changes. I was just chatting with Ms. Tovar before the meeting, and getting emails at 3:40 and comments, it's hard to process on the drive-in. I shouldn't be reading emails and driving, not that I did, but I prefer to, I understand the timelines and how fast we're moving, so, as long as it's wordsmithing, I do like changes that change verbiage from will to may. I'm always in favor of that, but as long as they're not major or moderate policy decisions, I'm perfectly fine with that, just to speed up the process. You shouldn't have to come back to us for every little change. So thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to volunteer too, because right now I'm a significant net producer of electricity. I'd rather have it go to EBCE than go to PG&E. So yeah, get me that sign-up form as quickly as possible. I only have 2 comments, and it seems basically both items that were recommended by the CAC and the East Bay Clean Power Alliance, I definitely would prefer a more aggressive phase-in for phase 1. I mean, we are probably going to encounter problems, but let's jump in and let's fix them, and let's do a very real initial tranche. And then also, again, obviously, the key reason I wanted to get behind this was to see more local renewable. So the suggestions related to that, definitely whatever we can do to get more local renewable. So those are the only comments I have. Thank you.
The very patient Ann Olivia.
I did just want to clarify that the letter that East Bay Clean Power Alliance submitted has accepting the language that we have worked on, but also suggests some other language that the advisory committee has not discussed as a group. So, and we will at some point go through our recommendations and why those were important. I would want to make sure that we had clear guidance of the spirit and intention of the board in order to do those, because we did not discuss that as a committee. So I would just want to make sure you guys weighed in on their points so that we have that direction.
So to speak to the phase-in period, what we put in the document, if we decide later that we want to accelerate the phase-in, we could do that, couldn't we?
Yeah. And I think that's sort of the
This
general...
just gives us the ability to, if something comes up, we could take it slow. But how we decide we want to phase it in as we get closer to launch, if we want to go more aggressive, we can do that.
Right. It's easier to go more aggressively than to slow down.
So, and then I want to address the other question about more local renewable energy, because I agree with that. And in fact, outside of rooftop solar, which is the more urban issue, the area. In Alameda County, and my friends from IEBW would agree with this, that my district is ground zero for renewable energy. My district is the windmills. Those can be a challenge to site. They get sued. There's a lot of problems with trying to get those done. But then when we try to do solar fields, the local Sierra Club comes out and fights them. So to say, we want to do all local renewable, our biggest opportunities are in my district. And I would say, okay, go ahead and put that in, but I know what's going to happen in my district, and I know the fights that we're going to have. So I would say leave the language somewhat loose until we can get some of the environmental groups that have been fighting these in my district to come around and say, okay, it's going to be okay to do these solar fields in this area, and to allow us to be able to site these facilities near the transmission facilities that are already out there. We don't have that luxury right now. I'm going to be really clear. One of the things that I do have going for me and Victor could even attest to this, is whenever somebody comes to me and says, I want to do a windmill project in your district, I tell them, go get labor support. And one of the reasons I do that is because I support labor. The second reason is because I know if labor comes in supporting them, when some of the other groups come in and fight it, labor's going to beat it. And so we have to be somewhat careful in the language we put in there right now, to be very honest with you. And it's not San Francisco Sierra Club, it is my local Sierra Club. But they come in and they say they're representing the Sierra Club, and it unwinds. So I think we need to be careful how we put it in. Unless we're just talking about rooftop solar. Then you can rooftop solar the whole urbanized area and be done.
Well, I don't think that the rooftop solar is, those certainly are not the totality of resources in the county. We need to think about all the most cost-effective resources. I will note that on Friday I'm actually going to go tour a development, a fairly early stage wind development in the Altamont Pass, just to see what kinds of opportunities are out there. So certainly it's top of mind.
Right, but there's even a solar field that wants to come on board that I'm aware of out in the Altamont that has been fought before. And somebody bought the project and they're going to try it again. So, I think we need to be careful. I mean, I appreciate the goal. That's why I got involved in this. That's why I wanted to start this in Alameda County. And I think we can get there, but we have to be careful how much we tie our hands right now. Dan? I'm sorry, go ahead, Nick. Yeah. You wanted to respond.
Oh, I just was going to say that one of the recommended, in response, and I don't want to steal Aunt Olivia's thunder to be able to walk through the recommendations, but one of the recommendations that I had as in response to the CAC's comments was to sort of shift from a discussion of local renewable generating assets, because that has some very specific connotations of, sometimes rooftop solar, to local distributed resources. So that can be larger solar, it can be wind, it can be other things as well. And it's a broader umbrella. And again, the goal of the IP is to give ourselves lots of flexibility and to state intention, but not be too detailed, so that we can indeed pursue the best opportunities that are available to us. And so that was the genesis of my sort of response. But I think that's something that hopefully we can talk about here, but we can work out the details over the coming days.
Okay. Anne Olivia, did you have something else that you wanted to add?
If you would like us to walk through why we're making these recommendations, there are a couple points that came up in community discussion that I think are important to bring to this board, but there's nothing lengthy.
Do you want to go now, or do you want to go to public comment?
Okay. I guess first and then to public comment.
Okay, let me do Dan real quick, and then I'm going to come back to you.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick things. One on the last point that Supervisor Haggerty was making. I don't see exactly what page that this was on, so I'm not sure what page he was referring to in terms of the language. But regardless, I think the general the consensus is that if we're doing, not just we, if anybody in the state is doing larger scale renewable energy projects, that the emphasis or the initial desire will be on previously disturbed land. Right? And that's what the state, even the feds, have kind of emphasized that. Not to the exclusion of anything else necessarily, but you go after previously disturbed land first, and then see where you're at, and that's your desire, your preferred option. So I don't know if we need to say that in here, but if there are those who are concerned about that, we could reference that if necessary, while not now excluding anything as a future option.
Can you tell me, Dan? And I'm not arguing. What is previously disturbed land in the Altamont?
I'd have to go take a site visit with a number of experts to determine that. But there are definitions of previous disturbed land in state and even federal regulations. I'm sure state for sure.
Is grazing land, because that's pretty much what the alt one is.
Yeah.
Is grazing land?
Somebody who's more of an expert than me would have to, I
think we should be careful about putting something in we don't know what the definition means.
Well, there are definitions. I'm just saying that I don't necessarily, I couldn't tell you that piece of land, but there are definitions, and that there's a consensus as to that being the desirable pathway first before going to pristine land. Again, not excluding anything in the future, just saying preference. I heard a comment earlier on something else that there's 30 to 60 day window before the money that we are owed, our customers, gets transferred to us. 30 days, if you're talking about tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, really, that's a huge float that somebody's making a lot of interest off of. PG&E would be the somebody. Whoever that somebody is, we should, I would hope that as we approach that point, barring any state requirement that we have no control over or can't change, I would hope that we would seek to negotiate something that brings that interest, that financial, that dollar interest to us where it is owed, and as opposed to letting it float and be sitting in PG&E's coffers.
And that's why I referred to, so they owe us, but then we owe our contract counterparties, the folks we're buying power from, and you can negotiate terms. You could say, we want a net 30, net 60 payment terms. So you deliver your electricity to us on day 0, but we're not going to pay you till we get paid. And again, that's not something we would put in our implementation plan, because that's going to be really very specific to the specific contracts that we sign with different projects or different, market participants. But that's certainly the kind of thing that we would discuss when we're thinking about treasury operations and sort of cost of finance, and what that sort of the differential between the float we can negotiate versus the float that we have to bear with PG&E.
Right, and almost those are almost two separate negotiations. One that doesn't necessarily impact the other directly. I just think that if there's a whole bunch of interest, dollars, that is sitting in PG&E because of a 30-day or more window that they're holding on to our money, we should capture that interest. And unless some state agency is preventing us from doing that, that should be what we try to make happen.
And as I understand it, Sean made a good point. It's actually the issue is not, it's the first 60 days. After you get through the first 60 days, then it's sort of a more ongoing, it's what they collect, they pay. But it's that first 60 days where we, have no track record, so, they have to go read the meters, and, our data management provider sends them the data. So it's the first 60 days that you're covering that float, and then after that, it's sort of more rolling. But your point is well taken, and it's something that we will definitely
I would just ask to look into that. And then finally, these first two, these two on this front page from the CAC recommendation, their red line language. On the front page, I'm totally fine with this red line language on this front page. So anyway, thank you.
So it's kind of interesting that Dan brought up it's not interesting, but he brought up the issue about PG&E and the float and all that, because I kind of jumped to that right away. Nick, are you listening? No, you're not. Nick, I was talking to you.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It was interesting that, because when you brought up the issue of PG&E and the money coming in the 30 days and all that, I immediately kind of jumped to something. I thought it was actually ongoing. I didn't realize it was like the startup, but it is a lot of money. And immediately I started thinking, is there a program that we could do to where it's direct payments to us? How do we do direct payments? Could we, credit people something? Is there some sort of program we can come up with that says direct pay to us? I mean, that's maybe something we think about down the road. Maybe it's not that big a deal, but it is, as Dan says, a lot of money.
I think that that's sort of part of the whole discussion that not just EBC but other CCAs are having around billing. And do you want to rely on the PG&E billing system and they're the entity that is collecting the funds, processing them, or is there some alternative where there's a CCA or a group of CCAs are doing their own billing? But it's something that we will certainly consider, and I imagine is will be a ripe topic for discussion, because your point is well taken, that this is the most important part. That interchange is so important, it's not necessarily a great idea to leave it to somebody else to manage it.
Well, they're going to charge, if the first 60 days is truly the biggest problem, to me it seems like, where PG&E is really going to be charging us is for the transmission costs. And it seems like we should be, if they're going to be making, if we could estimate the amount of interest they're going to be making off us, then maybe we want to get a credit on transmission costs. Okay, anybody else before I go to Ann Olivia? You have the floor.
Thank you. We had discussion on a lot of items, but only 3 points came up that we wanted clarification from the board on, or we wanted to add stronger language to clarify our intention, right? The first one is in Chapter 5. The only change here is may also evaluate more aggressive phase-in timelines in order to maximize revenue with the lowest risk of customer dissatisfaction. That was the language that we agreed to, recognizing that changing things in the implementation plan right now would delay its approval, and that is not something that we wanted to do. But I do need to point out that we had several speakers on this last night from a wide variety of constituent groups, labor, environmental advocates, East Bay Clean Power Alliance, the former commissioner from the public utility in Alameda, and every one of them spoke vehemently against such a conservative phase-in strategy. Our board did not re-vote on, to change our prior stance on that, because there were only 5 of us last night, so we just didn't do that. But this language we thought would be good, but I did want to share that as the Community Advisory Committee, we are us, but we are also here to advocate for the community, and they were very, very clear. I'm sure there will be people here this evening who will speak on that. The second one is in Chapter 6. And I believe that Nick had some suggestions on changing the exact language on this, which I'm more than happy to work with him on, but just to put that reference into the local development business plan, so it's clear that we are working to implement this. And then if you flip over the page, there is one more recommendation on the back. And when we were discussing as a board exit fees, and we wanted to say they were cost-based, it seemed to me that the idea was not to be punitive and that it wouldn't be an excessive fee. The way that the language was written, if it is including stranded assets, if somebody leaves after 3 years and we've had 10 years worth of electricity procurement already signed for them, that could be a massive fee. And the advisory committee wanted to clarify whether the termination fee is really supposed to be absolutely inclusive of all those costs, at which point we would want to tell people that if you don't opt out now during this free time, your exit fee could be massive. Because, and I don't, in our opinion, that did not necessarily seem like a good thing, hence we added this language. But it was not clear if the intention of the board was to recuperate all costs associated, no matter how large they were for the customer, or to say, let's look at administrative costs or So that was not clear, and again, happy to work with Nick to come up with the language, but we would want clarification on what the intention of the board was for that piece.
I just want to make one comment as it relates to that intention, and I think we'll work out some language. I think we're close to finding something that I think would work here. I will say that, and we've talked about this idea of cost-based exit fees. One of the fundamental principles of utility finance is having strong cost recovery mechanisms. One of the reasons why traditional direct access providers in California, the large energy retailers, don't sign long-term contracts, don't build lots of new steel, but tend to meet their RPS requirements through financial instruments, is because their customers can leave at any time. And so they can't reasonably go out there and go to financial institutions and borrow the large quantities they need to borrow to invest in projects that have 20-year contracts. So I think we have to just be very clear about what the implications of various sort of forms of exit fees are, and I think what we've tried to do here is give ourselves lots of options, flexibility, and do the robust analysis of what the various implications of different structures are, both to potential opt-outs when customers join, potential costs to customers if they stay in and opt out 1, 2, 5 years down the road. And with that robust analysis, we'll take it to the board. And it will be the board, you'll make a decision as to sort of what you feel is the right way to go as it relates to setting excess fees. Here, cost-based really gives us the flexibility to define at some later date what cost-based means. But again, I think we have discussed their proposed changes, and my main recommendation was to remove modest, because modest has some very clear implications. And just to say termination fees tended to be non-punitive, I think that very much is clear. I think the law would prohibit us to do anything that is punitive, that is not justified. So leave it at that.
Okay. Anybody else on this? Biddle, did you have something?
I was going to make a motion.
Well, no, we got speakers. Barbara Stebbins? All right. After Barbara, Jessica Tover, and then Tom Kelly, then Victor Uno.
All right, so I'm here tonight with the East Bay Clean Power Alliance, and our biggest issue with the implementation plan, the draft, was the phase-in numbers, really, and in particular the first phase-in. We are not here tonight to delay the implementation plan and therefore possibly delay the launch of the program. But we are here with an understanding that there really is a broad base of opposition to this really unprecedentedly radically small rollout for the first phase. It is less than 1% of the accounts. It is about 2.5% of the load. Sonoma Clean Power, which was only the second community choice program to launch, launched with much higher numbers. They launched with 20,000 accounts, which 20,000 accounts was 15% of their accounts, and it was 40% of their load. Peninsula Clean Energy, which just launched recently, launched with 26% of their accounts, which is 68,000 accounts, and 35% of their load. You know, this is over 10 times what is being proposed for East Bay Community Energy. We think it's going to hamper the ability of the program to hire staff, to be able to roll out programs, that it's really going to set a very bad launch for the program, including problems with marketing. Most people won't even know there is a program out there because it's only municipal accounts. So that's the other thing. Most of these programs had a mix of accounts. Our other suggestions are really minor word changes. One simply extends the reference to the local development business plan to a section in the financial plan section, which right now is basically just word for word a copy from other implementation plans. We would like to see our local development business plan actually given some prominence in our implementation plan. Not where it's going to tie our hands, but simply to acknowledge that we have this unique aspect to our program. The other thing we'd like is to add under the data management services, which is, I forget exactly where, page 47, I know that. We would just like to add data from distributed energy resources, which is going to be really important in terms of integrating local renewable resources into the load. So we'd like to do that. I know I'm out of time. I just want to add really quickly to what was being said about the exit fee personally, not for East Bay Clean Power Alliance, that quite frankly, if I thought I was going to have to sign up to a program for life or get hit with a huge fee, I would not do it. I would opt out.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Very simply, Barbara really went into it, but East Bay Clean Power Alliance really encourages you to really be brave and raise the number of accounts in your initial phase-in. We think that that's really important because there's a lot of benefits, and as you can see from all the other programs, there has not been problems, and their numbers when they first phased in customers were a lot higher than ours, as Barbara mentioned. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. Tom Kelly, Victor Uno.
Thank you. Good evening. Tom Kelly, resident of Berkeley. I came down tonight thinking that I was going to have to speak out against an effort to try and include language in the IP that would preclude a city from enrolling all of its customers at 100% renewable. As I've mentioned before, the Air District has entered into a contract with us to actually look at that question, what the implications would be for a city to actually do that. So far, Albany, Berkeley, Piedmont, and Hayward have expressed an interest in seeing where that would go. So I'm glad to hear that we're not going in that direction. That gives me a few minutes just to comment on a couple of other things. On the language that the CAC is suggesting on Chapter 6, it says that once the EBCE program demonstrates it can operate successfully. Well, that's pretty loose. I don't know what that means. Does that mean 3 months, 6 months, 2 years? I mean, it's very, very, it's just completely undefined. And the second thing is it ties this agency to the local development business plan that hasn't been completed yet. So in a way, you're making a commitment to something that you haven't had a chance to look at. I'd actually personally prefer to see the language that was in there originally. The next thing is I just point out that when you enroll in municipal accounts, most of the cities in the Bay Area now are enrolling their accounts at 100% renewable instead of whatever the default is. So you might want to just think about that in terms of what that means in terms of your purchasing. There is what I think is a mistake in the slides that Gary provided. PG&E states that its GHG-free energy mix is now 70% GHG-free, not 60% as the slide shows. So that's important because the primary purpose of this program is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And if we don't meet or beat greenhouse gas emissions, when we launch, then we run the risk of not living up to our promises, and also cities opting out of the program entirely. So I think that's, last thing, Supervisor Haggerty, you'd be glad to know that Livermore Valley Joint Unified School District is going to start the installation of 2.4 megawatts of solar there, and I'm glad that you were able to help make that happen. Thank you.
We were happy to help. It's easier to do it in the city than it is in the county. Go ahead, Victor.
Good evening, Scott and CEO. You're on the job now, I think, officially, so congratulations. Victor, you know, with the IBW, but also representing the Alameda Labor Council, Josie Camacho, the Executive Secretary Treasurer, and also on behalf of Andreas Kluver, the building trades. First of all, to congratulate the effort to finally get this implementation plan to a point where it can be refined and then submitted. The concern that the IBW has, as well as the Labor Councils, is in fact the launch. And we understand the 3-phase, and it sounds nice and easy, but it really does not provide what we feel is the financial basis to sustain the actual organization. And so if you look at Table 4 in the draft implementation plan, and that's on page 23 of my copy, it does show that in Phase 1, small commercial 918, large commercial 101 accounts, street traffic lights, 3,695. These traffic lights don't complain about what they're being charged for energy, or if they're going to be with PG&E or with this new energy authority. So this new authority is not going to get a lot of complaints, maybe by the managers of the accounts of the cities who are looking at their budgets. But if it's going to be at or below PG&E's rates, there will be no complaints. We have, the IBW has consistently said and suggested that you roll in some of the residential customers, the highest tier rate payers, the ones that can generate revenue for this organization, for this new authority. We totally align with comments previously made about the great threat to the business plan that's being developed over local projects, and how can we implement through funding of these programs. And without that financial basis, all the reference to the local business development plan are going to be moot. So we urge the director, because this is going to be the smallest rollout ever in a phase, that you seize the authority and the initiative to implement a thoughtful rollout that will, in fact, roll in more than 0.8%. 0.8%. It's pitiful. It's not a floor. It's the sub-basement on level 5 below the ground. We really feel very strongly about this, and I would just say that the Community Advisory Committee heard testimony from a number of speakers on this issue. We urge that as you approve this plan, that the leadership be given the ability, authority, initiative, and please show leadership on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Okay, I have no other speakers, so I'll bring it back to the board for deliberation and action. Al?
So I think some good comments from the Clean Power Alliance, from the CAC. I think we're all basically, I suspect, in agreement with all of the recommendations. I know, even though I've been advocating for the plan to talk about a slow rollout, I'm very much hoping that we can go much faster. And one of the things we've talked about many times is that it's very easy for us to speed up. It's very hard for us to slow down. So if we were to change the plan to say, well, we're going to do half on day 1, and then we're not ready on day 1, then that's a catastrophe. But if we say we're going to do 1% on day 1, and then we decide to do 25 because we're ready, 25%, that's very easy to do. So I think the plan is fine as is. I think all of us want to go as fast as possible. And I know we'll continue to put the pressure on the CEO to help make that happen as we get closer. And with that, I think, you know, it's just some minor tweaks to be done here. So I'm gonna move the staff recommendation with the understanding that the CEO will be working with the various parties to tweak the language, and he has that authority to make those minor tweaks and finalize the document so it can be submitted before our next meeting.
Is there a second?
Thank you.
Is that a second, or that's a second? Okay. Any discussion? Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm being the alternate. I'm not normally here at these meetings, but I do see that if we're going to roll out 500,000 customers residential, we should have a small percentage of that, at least to make sure that we understand what we're doing in that space. If we're going to be targeting, you know, that less than 1%, having a sense of what that residential rollout is going to look like is going to be important for us to have a good grasp of it. I mean, the majority, about 90% or so, will be residential customers. So we will need to be successful for this entity to succeed. So without them, at least in the initial stages, it's going to be very difficult to transition one customer and then add another customer. I think the opportunity is there to do so, and putting more pressure to take on some element at the discretion of the CEO will be important to take on. I think it's good to be flexible, but I think it also has a commitment on day one to have some kind of residential impact for those high-use customers, who may be able to also bring metering back to us, but also be the core customers or constituents that we serve, mostly the residential and business. So we have to have that balanced approach, in my opinion. So that would be my thought, but I'm happy to move the plan along.
So I just have a question to the consultant. The implementation plans of some of the other CCs that were referred to, was their language similar to what we're putting in today, and then they, as they move forward, just decided to accelerate it and move faster?
Yes, all of them tried to build in flexibility, just like you're doing it. The implementation plans are permissive and not mandatory, to where it sets sort of the baseline for you, which you can add to, and that's what everybody does.
See, that's what I'm kind of feeling almost inclined to go with Al's motion, because it then becomes, and I know Victor will do it, and I know Jessica will do it, and I know Ann Olivia will do it, and I know some of the members on the board will do it, and myself, because quite frankly, for somebody who's been dealing with this for a very long time, you know, I had to convince my board to do this first before I even got to all you people. So I've been dealing with this for quite a long time. I would love nothing more than to launch and be done, and to just run an energy provider. So I want to get up and going as fast as possible. But I see the benefit of putting something in a document that doesn't tie our hands, and then relying on people like Ann Olivia and Victor, members of this board, Jessica, to put the heat on us to launch and get out there. Because believe me, there is nobody in this room that wants to get as many people up and running as fast as possible to do the largest first phase. I'd like to do 100%. I understand the reason why we don't want to do that. I get that. But nobody wants to bring in as many customers on day one, or more customers on day one than me. Nobody in this room. But I do see the reason for leaving this as ambiguous as possible at this point, for that very purpose. You know, tell the CPUC what they want to hear, and then it's up to us to do what we do. And that's what I think we should do. Dan?
Oh, I think Nick was first.
Huh?
Nick was first.
Oh, Nick?
Sure. So thanks. So does your motion include the flexibility for the CEO, do you think, to incorporate these changes?
It did.
Okay, got it. And then secondly, my only concern, I think I'm in agreement that we can change our own implementation plan. You know, we have the flexibility to enroll faster down the road. I would agree with that. My only caveat would be, this is a document we're submitting now to the state. Will they look askance at it because of this slow rollout? Will that raise any eyebrows and put into question the viability of this plan because of the slow rollout? That would be one of my big concerns.
Somebody want to answer that?
I'll start and Nick can finish. We've been to the PUC several times talking about launches and rollouts for the CCAs. We're doing San Jose's and LA's right now, and they're all going with municipal accounts only, just like you. And the CPUC hadn't said anything negative about that at all.
Did they say the same thing that we're saying?
Pardon?
Do they say the same thing that we're saying in relationship to rollout?
Yeah, LA and San Jose are doing exactly the same thing as you. And with respect to the CPUC, that they don't have any problem with smaller rollouts. I think their biggest concern is making sure it goes well. And they understand the merits of starting slow and making sure it's going well before you introduce it to everybody.
Nick, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's that all makes sense to me. You know, I would say the only other factor that I could imagine could influence the phase-in schedule would be some major development around the utility exit fee structure. So we have our PCIA, and it's calculated. There are projections for how it will grow or change over time. If, in 3 months or 4 months, there's a significant development, that's something that we would want to consider. That's uncertainty. Again, that's going to be part of the discussion that we have over the coming months. I expect that we'll be bringing this back with a real plan for a 1-phase 100%, 2-phase, whatever it may be, in the November, December timeframe. So we're going to be doing a lot of work between now and then to figure out exactly how quickly we can go, because there is a lot of interest in moving quickly, in bringing investment into Alameda County, and getting our customers signed up. I know there's a lot of really eager customers who want to do this, both commercial and residential. So I think we have our work cut out for us to get there quickly.
Dan?
Thank you. I'm fine with the motion, and I share the desires that we heard today and that I've articulated in previous meetings about going a little more quickly in terms of bringing in our commercial customers and residential eventually as well. But